Aloha, everyone, and welcome to Civil Beats Ideas Live show for Wednesday, March 24th, 2021. We're so happy to have you with us, and I am so excited about the conversation that we're going to have today. It's the first week of spring, and I can't think of a better time and a better topic to be talking about right now than seed. And we have three experts in Hawaii agriculture here with us today from three different islands, and they all teamed up to write a wonderful essay for us that ran on March 7th. You can find it on our website, and we'll also put it in the chat today. Their essay was entitled, "Seed Diversity is Vital to the Future of Food." And these are three people who know a great deal about seed. Joining us today, we have from Molokai, Glenn Teves. Glenn is a longtime UH County Extension agent. From Oahu, we have Jay Bost, who is a farm coach with the Go Farm program. And from Hawaii Island, we have Nancy Redfeather, who has been involved with seed for many years and who is currently the education and outreach coordinator for the Hawaii Seed Growers Network. And all three are members of the network. So today we're going to talk, we've titled our talk today, How Can We Make Hawaii's Agriculture Thrive? We'll be talking for about an hour, and we're live. So we want to invite you to join us in any capacity that you would like to. Send us comments if you would like to. If you have questions for any of our guests here today, then we invite you to share those with us, and we will turn to them and explore them. But we love to start these shows by asking each one of our guests to tell us a little bit about themselves and how they came to be involved in the topic that we're discussing today. So today, I'd love to invite each one of the three of you to talk to us about your own relationship with seed. And Glenn, would you start for us?
I was born and raised in Manoa Valley, where we raised animals. My mom was heavily involved in flowers. So she'd make lay flowers almost every day. And that's where I got involved in seeds. Then in 1981, I graduated from Kamehameha Schools and also University of Hawaii College of Tropical Agriculture in horticulture. And I had some great mentors that helped me to understand seeds, one of which was Jim Gilbert, who developed the tomato varieties and pea varieties. He was a stellar plant breeder, and he really got me involved in seeds. I started working with the University of Hawaii in 1981. I was the first extension agent hired to work with Native Hawaiian farmers, Hawaiian homeland farmers. And through that time, I was involved in seed. I was looking for varieties that would grow well in Hawaii. And in 2010, Kohala Center had a program to teach us about seeds. And that's when this whole seed network really took off.
Okay, mahalo. Jay, can we turn to you?
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate studies at Prescott College in Arizona in their agroecology program, and came upon the work of Carrie Fowler. I ran into this book that actually a teacher there told me about called Shattering, that is by one of the authors was Carrie Fowler, who is one of the people that's been instrumental to go on and create the Global Crop Diversity Trust and the Svalbard Seed Bank up in the Arctic Circle. But I just think reading that book and realizing how much diversity we have had in the past and how much we were losing and how important it was for that to be actively cultivated got me really excited and interested. And then also the work of Gary Nabhan, who was an ethnobotanist working a lot in the Southwest and helped start Native Seed Search and trying to, reclaim and perpetuate these varieties that evolved in the Southwest and were well adapted to the specific growing conditions there. I found really inspiring. And so I've gone on, for decades studying agriculture and came out to Hawaii to do some graduate work at UH, and came on a field trip to the Waimanalo Research Station and met Dr. James Brubaker out in the cornfield, barefooted, walking around, showing us all this corn. And I thought, I've got to spend some more time with this guy. And so set up sort of like an independent study with him, and started to spend more and more time on the research station. And then at that time, Go Farm Hawaii, which is a new farmer training program, was just getting going, and realized that they needed someone to help teach new farmers. And I thought doing that and being able to do some more actual growing and teaching was more what I'd rather do than doing lab work, which I was kind of starting to do more and more of. And while that's interesting, I'd rather look at the results than actually do the lab work. And yeah, around that time, heard about the Hawaii Public Seed Initiative, and went over to one of the early meetings and got to meet Glenn and Nancy, and yeah, just start these great relationships that have developed over the years, and to the Hawaii Seed Growers Network, where we're all growing seed together.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jay. Nancy.
Yeah, so in 1994, I was a teacher in the Waldorf School, and I decided that I wanted to start a school garden and work with all the students from K to 8. But I wanted to go back and learn more about gardening. And at that point, John Jevons showed up on Hawaii Island. He had a company called Bountiful Gardens. He was a seed grower from California. And so one afternoon during our 5-day session, he told us that a new report had just come out from the FAO that was predicting that by 2005, 93% of all the varieties of food that were grown in the United States, all the seed varieties in 1900, that 93% of them would either be gone or extinct or not available. And I thought, wait a minute, this can't possibly be true. I mean, this is what our ancestors had counted on for their food sources, for their family, for the last 100 years. But it was true, and the story of that is long and complicated, and too long for this time. But I just started, I had always been a gardener since I was a child. I just started saving seed. And when I went to work for the Kohala Center in 2007, a grant opportunity came up from OREI, which is an arm of the USDA called the Organic Research and Education Initiative. And that year they were giving grants if someone would do a statewide seed symposium. So I thought, oh my gosh, this is so perfect. And so we partnered with Organic Seed Alliance, and they brought over their A team. And we put on a statewide seed conference for about 150 people. And we still have a really great baseline survey that we did way back then in 2010. Then a working group started from there, and the Hawaii Public Seed Initiative was born. And then we just started working together. And there was, I don't know, Glenn, how many years? We traveled around the state, a group of 5 of us, and we gave workshops, the farmers and gardeners, called Seed Basics. And so what we were trying to do is just try to get this renewed, this idea of farmers and gardeners starting to save seed again. Because by that time, people weren't doing it anymore. We were losing that knowledge really fast. And so one thing led to another until 2016, 15, 16, we started the Hawaii Seed Growers Network. And then, and eventually that has morphed into the online marketplace. So there's a large group of us working together now to really bring these varieties to Hawaii's home growers and market growers that do really well here in Hawaii, especially in our extreme climates that we're having right now. So, just one thing evolves into the other, and it's really a privilege to work with Jay and Glenn on this project.
Yeah. So in your essay, you did a really beautiful job of talking about seed in a very large way, going back 10,000 years, talking about the human history of saving seed, and then bringing it very specifically to Hawaii, and really talking about the history of the plant breeding that went on at the university, talking about the UH Seed Lab. I'm talking about some of the incredible plant breeders and why their work was so critical and remains perhaps even more critical today. So Glenn, because you have lived it, you were in there, you really knew them, I think it would be such a gift for our viewers if you could talk a little bit about the plant breeding, the history of those programs at the university, and why that diversity of seed is so important for Hawaii today.
Wow. What's interesting, I think, you had the USDA coming to Hawaii and doing some of the research station work in the 20s, or actually earlier than that. So at that time, they were looking at what can grow in Hawaii. They're looking for economic crops, planting rubber and everything under the sun. But around World War II, things started to really start happening. So you had a professor named Walter Fraser, and he started putting together a team of breeders to develop new varieties for Hawaii. And at that time, there was a new disease that was wiping out all the tomato in Hawaii around World War II. And what he did was he developed a resistant variety called Pearl Harbor. It came out right around Pearl Harbor time. And then he started developing all these varieties for the different islands. So every variety, like Molokai, the Big Island, Kauai, Lanai, and even had one called Kalohi, which is a cross between Molokai and Lanai, which is the channel between the island. And so he had all these different varieties. And then along the way, you had other breeders coming online. And around the late 40s to the early 50s, Jim Gilbert came along. And Jim Gilbert was a very interesting, a lot of these breeders had a strong background in diseases, plant pathology. So they were disease experts, but they're also breeders. So they're breeding for resistance to diseases. And Hawaii had very unique diseases that they had to overcome. But some of these groundbreaking work had an impact in the entire world. One of them was resistance to nematodes, root knot nematodes. And these are microscopic eelworms that attack the roots of crops. Big problem in the tropics. And he developed resistant varieties. And these varieties became the backbone of all the varieties that we have today worldwide. So you had people like him, then you had fruit breeders like Dick Hamilton that went all over the world and collected different varieties of mangoes and lychee and developed new varieties. So this kind of ended, I want to say it kind of started scaling down in the late 80s and the 90s. And today we have one person doing breeding work, just started a few years ago, but it's not enough to create a critical mass, and the needs of breeding are greater than it's ever been before. So I think Hawaii has a challenge, University of Hawaii. The university is not as large, the college is not as large as it used to be. It was downsized in the late 90s, early 2000s, from 12 departments down to 6 departments. So the college is much smaller, and it may even get smaller again with this economic challenge we're dealing with right now. So that's some of it. The need is greater than it's ever been before.
And whichever one of the three of you wants to take this question, but can you speak specifically to why exactly the need is greater than it's ever been before?
I mean,
I can, go ahead, Jay.
I mean, I could offer a few things, and I think, one of the issues is like Glenn mentioned, a lot of the early work was on disease resistance, and these breeders were able to successfully make varieties that had disease resistance, but we keep getting new diseases and new pests. So they bred tomatoes with tomato spotted wilt virus resistance, but since then we've gotten tomato yellow leaf curl virus. And just because we're at this crossroads of global trade, like we're just constantly getting new pests and diseases. And so like the breeding can't stop, like, because the new pests and diseases keep coming. So that's That's, I think, a major issue why it's so important now. Our climate getting, more extreme. We've always been the tropics and been hot, so that's nothing new, but it seems like, we're getting into periods of having more extreme heat, longer periods of drought in areas that aren't used to that. So developing varieties with more, resilience to those sorts of conditions. Nutrition is another important one, of breeding crops for, specific nutritional attributes, and then people's tastes are constantly changing. And, we're always talking about how we need to become more self-reliant out here, being in the middle of the Pacific, and how much of our food we're importing. And to do the import replacement, we need varieties that do well here and that people want to eat and buy. And the way that you're going to, do that is through active selection and breeding for our, conditions and what people want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know we're going to cover a lot of different topics today, but specific to breeding, and whoever wants to take this one, maybe Nancy, what would you like to see happen? Is it, do you feel like you have very clear ideas UH needs to create more positions, or, what can happen in the immediate almost to really ensure that this breeding does happen?
I think Glenn's a better person to answer that question, because he talks about this a lot.
Well, we deal with a lot of different issues. I think one is that most of the plants are developed in the mainland, and they have different priorities. Their priority is cold tolerance because the snow is coming, and earliness because the snow is coming. So, this is not our priorities. We have a tropical climate, and the problem with the tropics is not the hot days, it's the warm nights. And the plants, especially the temperate climate plants developed in Europe, cannot handle these kinds of conditions. So you have to screen varieties that have a tropical background that can handle these kind of conditions. The other thing you try to do, especially with the high price of fertilizer, and now with the freight costs going up, is how do you find plants that need less food, or have more aggressive root systems that can scavenge food in the ground that grow better in Hawaii. The other thing is you got insect pests. So you need to have crops that maybe they're a little hairy, so the pests can't get to the stems and sting them and give them a new disease. So you have very different priorities in Hawaii that you need to develop for Hawaii conditions. In addition to this, we have over 160 different kinds of soils, more than any place in the world. On top of that, we have probably most of the climatic zones. I think we have two climatic zones we don't have, and one of them is tundra. We have no tundra, no year-round freeze. But we have these special conditions. You put these two numbers together, so maybe 8 climatic zones, 160 soil types. You multiply that number, and that's how many microclimates you got in Hawaii. So every microclimate has different requirements. But what that does, it creates an opportunity to grow almost any kind of crop in Hawaii, from teas to wasabi to you name it. We have a climate to grow almost every single crop, blueberries, raspberries, everything. So that is the challenge. But with that challenge comes a lot of commitment by the university, by researchers, to really get down in terms of breeding for our needs in Hawaii.
Okay. So there's a couple examples of some really good work that Extension has been doing this year. Jensen Ueda has done a big garlic trial for Hawaii that was really essential. And he has found many varieties that do really well here in Hawaii. That is something that hasn't been grown here before. The extension agents of Kula did a really big trial with short day onions. That was a really successful trial too. And so we need to encourage the University of Hawaii to to continue to support in a larger way research and development of crops for food security for Hawaii, because that's what a land-grant university is really supposed to be doing. And so we want to encourage them to continue that program, and they're going to have to invest more in it, which means that maybe the legislature would have to give them some special monies for breeding programs, because if they could realize that breeding programs are really the basis of food security programs for Hawaii.
So it sounds like the trials, the breeding, they are happening. It's just that you would like to see a lot more of it happening.
Well, you know,
Very little.
also, you know, we can't forget that for like the first 11,900 years, the breeding was being done by gardeners and farmers around the world. You know, it wasn't until the last 100 years that we really thought that the university or companies or whatever were the ones that had to do the breeding. So, you know, we have plenty of gardeners and farmers in Hawaii that have developed varieties. Glenn could tell you farmers that developed varieties that were picked up by UH and are sold in the seed lab. I mean, so there's many different, it's not just the university that would be doing breeding and research. This could also be like a citizen science project.
Okay, so that's wonderful. And then we've got several questions that have come in. Here's the most immediate though question from Yuki. She says, garlic, ! When will seed become available? And maybe, I don't know if you can speak to that, but that kind of gets to the point that it seems like you're making, that this isn't just all about the ivory tower. This is something that people can be doing in their own backyards. And Jay, you know, I know you're involved with the Go Farm program.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about the Go Farm program, how that trains people, and how, just as someone who is a citizen scientist, is there overlap there? What if you're just somebody who's watching this show today because you love agriculture and you want to become involved?
Yeah, I think so Go Farm Hawaii is a new farmer training program that the university and community colleges started probably 7-8 years ago now, and we have 2 sites on Oahu, one on Maui, one on Kauai, and one on the Big Island. And so on each site we end up kind of almost functioning, and in the particular site that I'm on, we are on a UH research station, but our other sites kind of become these little farmer citizen science research sites where we're trying to figure out what varieties do well, teaching new farmers. That's something that, number one, they need to see what are extension agents looking at and saying does well, but they also need to be doing their own research and finding out what does well. When we're teaching our students marketing, a lot of what we do, especially when they're early on in the training program, is like a CSA model, a community supported agriculture model. So they're finding people to sign up to buy vegetables from them for 7 to 10 weeks. And so people wanting to get involved, whether it's, you know, Go Farm CSAs or other CSAs, that's a really great way to link up directly with growers, be able to give your direct feedback to these growers. I didn't like that broccoli, that cauliflower was amazing. So then the farmer knows that grew really well, consumers liked it, that's a win, I'm gonna go with that. But if you're just kind of, you know, growing wholesale and it disappears into wholesale markets and you're not getting that direct feedback from a consumer, you don't really know how much people like that. And I saw that we had a question, someone asking about other, you know, areas of the states and the world, and we're talking about citizen science. There's a really neat project that all of us have been, I think, admirers of and aware of, called NOVIC, which is the Northern Organic Vegetable Improvement Collaborative, and it's a Organic Seed Alliance in Washington, Oregon State, University of Wisconsin, and Cornell. And so they're on this northern tier, high latitude, cold weather. And so they'll trial stuff on research stations, then with farmers on their farms, you know, across those environments. And I think developing like a more robust trial network here in the state would be something really great, whether it's the university creates like a seed, Hawaii Seed Systems position, and they work with extension agents and Go Farm and growers to kind of coordinate, okay, let's do trials across the state, and then what works well. And then link up with places like Florida, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, out in the Pacific, other people dealing with similar conditions. And then, Glenn was really inspirational, just at our meetings kept talking about Taiwan, they have amazing seeds. And so he got me all fired up, and I went to Taiwan and went on a pilgrimage to the World Vegetable Center. And that's a place that's almost like the Hawaii of today, like Hawaii used to be, of kind of the most active place in the world with breeding for tropical issues is going on. And so bringing some of that material over, which has happened some, but we could do that in a way more focused way, and trialing that here and then figuring out what does well. And in the cases where those are open pollinated varieties, we could start saving the seed and producing it here. And if it's a hybrid, then we've got to import it from them. But, at least it's, finding things that do really well and address our needs.
Yeah. Here's a question that's come in from Jamil. And the question is, what seed breeding techniques are being used that are still rooted in native wisdom and traditional ecological knowledge? Nancy, that feels like one for you.
Well, the Hawaiians were really astute breeders. There were over 300 varieties of taro that was bred from the cross-pollination of the seed of the taro. And so, we've pretty much lost that today. But seed breeding relies on the grower really having good observation skills and starting with the right foundational seed. So you have to do your research, when if you're looking for seed for Hawaii and you're going through your seed catalogs, you're looking to buy seed that doesn't bolt easily, likes warm weather, can withstand drought, doesn't mind deluge of water. So when you start with seed that has more possibilities for adaptation to Hawaii, and then you grow it out, and maybe you grow it out in each season, and then you use your observation skills and you take notes in your journal, and you see like how did it do now? Like I just did a big broccoli trial because I thought it would do really well in the winter, and it just suffered. Kona, for the last 2 years, we have not had a dry season. It just torrentially rains all through the year. It rains all winter, and then it rains all summer. And so the broccolis that I put in this year, hoping to get some seed from, I wasn't able to get anything. So I'm going to try it again in the spring. Maybe the spring is going to be a better time for this. So I mean, that's pretty much native wisdom, is that you do what people have always done, and that is plant things out in different seasons, observe the ones that work, then you work with that, you save the best, and you replant, and you do it over and over again. I have heard that it takes about 12 years to develop a new seed variety. Whether you do it with genetic engineering or you do it with classical breeding, it's just about the same amount of time. So it's, you have to grow something out for many, many generations. And that's just what native peoples always did. And they shared seed with their neighbors and with farmers in their areas and gardeners. And by exchanging seed and growing seed over and over again in the same place, the seed actually can genetically engineer itself to become more adapted to hotter weather, warmer nights, or more rain. Not every seed can do this, but a lot of seeds can. When I first started growing the Alan Chadwick Blue Lake green bean, It didn't like it here at all. It was used to Molokai. It was used to being grown on the ocean in Molokai. And so it took me many years of trials here to get that seed to adapt to this place, but it did. And now it's really strong, and nothing, the Chinese beetles don't bother it anymore. It's like, so the plant itself has created the changes that are needed in order to adapt to this place. And that's what we're talking about here. And that's why there were so many varieties of things, because they were developed for a certain place.
Yeah.
I wanted to add to that, you know, what Nancy was talking about taro. So it's believed that based on genetics, Polynesians brought in about 5 or 6 different varieties of taro. And out of those varieties, they selected and bred about 300 varieties. Today, we have about 55 left. We've lost them. Even in the last century, probably lost a big chunk of them. But some of them are adapted to really dry conditions, such as the Mana family and the Lauloa family. Others can last in the field for a long time after they're mature, such as Moi. There's some of them that are really purple, but you got to get them out of the ground real fast when they mature, such as Lehua. So you have basically varieties that the Hawaiians selected for different conditions. Another example is when we had that we had the conference in 2010, I hooked up with one of the vegetable breeders in Oregon. So he was growing lettuce. He now has about 140 varieties of lettuce. His name is Frank Morton. So I told Frank, hey, I got this lettuce you might want to try. It was Manoa Lettuce. So he bred it with one of his varieties, and he can't believe it. He's already developed like 10 different varieties from Manoa Lettuce. So his variety is called Manoa Leopard. It's a spotted Manoa Lettuce. So I told him, I need to try it on Molokai to see how it does. So I grew it in the heat of summer. And so when you have high conditions, the lettuce will bolt, they will have this tip burn, this browning of the edges. So I planted 50 plants, and all the ones that have problems, I cut it out, ended up with 7 plants that could handle those hot conditions. And this is an example of exactly what you do. When you hear breeding, you think of this complex thing, and it's actually going out there and finding the good ones. Like you planted 20 beans, and this one bean just does way better than everything else. And you take all your seeds from there, and the next generation, you might put it in a rainy season to see how it does in the rain. The next year, you throw it out in the summer to see how, and pretty soon you got a variety, as Nancy was talking about, that is adapted to your climate.
Yeah, yeah. And so that just speaks to what's so foundational to everything we're talking about, which is this incredible, profound wisdom that the plants themselves carry and have. They know how to adapt, right? So I guess, Glenn, because you've been involved with this, I was going to ask you if you, with your work, you know, you mentioned working on the Hawaiian homelands, working with farmers. What are there any particular crops, particular seeds where you felt this was an incredible success story, a success story maybe that you want to share with the viewers of something that you watched a seed be developed or a crop that grew where you felt this worked so well?
Well, there was one situation on Molokai. We had this family that's been growing sweet potatoes for a long time, Heine and Becky Mokuao. And so they had a white skinned potato with purple flesh inside. And it took them the whole day to get the red dirt off the potatoes. And you know, the red dirt in Olivo is like the one in Mililani, and they couldn't get the red dirt off. And I told them, don't worry, someday we're gonna find a red flesh potato and we don't have to worry about washing the dirt off. They thought it was so funny. They started laughing and laughing. About 8 years later, Heine calls me up. He says, you got to come down here. You got to come down here. Look what I found. I go down there, and he's a red potato, red-skinned potato with purple flesh that he found in the field. It was a seed that dropped in the field, and it started the new generation. And now people are growing it today, the purple potato. So that's one example. And that can happen with taro. Sometimes a baby will come out different than its mother, and it has different attributes. You save it, and we see what is called mutations. We see that a lot sometimes. That's probably one of the better examples. There's some there's a retired specialist. His name is Ken Takeda. And he had these seeds from the 90s and nobody ever grew it. And he said, you guys should try my seeds. It was an eggplant. And the plant was resistant to this disease in the ground called bacterial wilt that just kills all of it. So the extension agents started running with it. Jerry Sugano and Jensen Ueda and a couple other people started running with it and developed 2 new varieties of eggplant, one called Hamasaki and the other one called Puamoho. But the Hamasaki one is really interesting because it was grown by a gardener in Lapahoihoi. And he had a problem with bacterial wilt. So he grew it in the field and he kept on selecting for generations and generations. And that variety probably has the most resistance to bacterial wilt. And we have a lot of examples like that. Another one I need to mention is an eggplant that a farmer had in Waianae. And so the University of Hawaii had a trial and he went to the trial and he said, your varieties are junk. My variety has twice the yield of your varieties. So he gave it to the university, they planted it out, and sure enough, his variety had twice the yield. And so I got to meet him and I said, Mr. Nita, where did you get these seeds? He goes, you know that store down East Molokai? I said, well, we only have one store on East Molokai. That's where I found it in the garden next there. I said, oh yeah, it's an old Filipino man that has a garden. He got it from this old man and he started developing a new variety. And that variety is the backbone of the eggplant breeding program at the University of Hawaii today.
Wow. So that goes right back to your point, Nancy, about citizen scientists and just home garden breeders.
Yeah.
Here's a question from Lena. She's asking, what more could be done in the education system to gear and direct young farmers of the elementary and middle school age toward careers in these areas of specialty and breeding? I don't recall ever learning any of this outside of the Teves household, but she says, I believe it is extremely vital. So how to, really like even at the young level, and I know, Nancy, you've been involved in school garden programs, but in a widespread way to get back that, in your essay, that beautiful essay, you talked about how every single one of us had ancestors who saved seed. But now it's such I think, a foreign idea for the vast majority. So how would that be done to actually normalize understanding seed and saving seed?
Well, I mean, as soon as there's a school garden program, it's actually a program, it has a school garden teacher and there's a program. Today, it's also called INA-based education, agricultural education. Then there's lots of opportunities for all those young people to grow, to research different varieties that they might want to try in their garden, grow them out, save seed. And then, as they get up into the middle school, they can start breeding. They can start creating new varieties themselves in their school gardens, and they can name them, and they can, this is something that could be a really rich part of education, because the school garden is really a curriculum strategy more so than anything else. It's a place, it's an outdoor classroom that students can work in, and they can do science, and they can learn about nutrition and food systems. They can connect it with their writing and their English classes. They can connect it with everything. So I think the more we can get school garden programs started in our schools, the more the seed research will just come right out of it. It's just part of gardening.
Okay.
I totally agree. I go every Friday to garden with my son and the kids in his 3rd grade class. And I mean, it's amazing. You just put out some like bean, I'll just take beans in the pods that I need to clean. But I'm like, oh, the kids will love this. And they naturally get it. They clean it. They start sorting them by variety. And I think, like Nancy's saying, I think if you just have the space and the tactile environment for them to do these things experientially, it's just going to happen. If it's this kind of abstract thing, let's talk about why this is important and talk. I just don't think they're going to get it in the same way. So yeah, the more school gardens, the better.
And
And
you
the
know what?
more community
It really,
gardens.
oh, I'm sorry, Jay.
Oh, go ahead.
I was listening to a report of the new COVID money that's coming from Washington to the schools for this next round of funding. And there's going to be a lot of funding coming to schools for teachers to reduce class size. And so if you had your students back in school and you wanted to reduce class size, but you don't have enough classrooms or buildings to put them in, take them outside.
Yep.
Take them outside and put up a big tent and take some of this COVID money and hire some outdoor educators, environmental educators, garden teachers, and, you know, split a class up into 2 groups of 12 or whatever it is, and take half of them out and do your learning outside. I mean, Hawaii is the one state where you can do this 365 days a year.
Yeah.
When I was the supervisor for the Food Corps program for Hawaii, I would go to these national conferences with 18 other state supervisors, and they would all be sitting around the table saying, yeah, you know, by the 1st of May, we got to go out into the garden and we actually got to plant something, but then the kids didn't see it. But then when we came back in September, they got to harvest it. And the rest of the year they were inside. And I'm thinking, oh, I better not say anything because it doesn't seem like I'm bragging or something. But, you know, this is our asset. We
Right.
have an asset for outdoor education here in Hawaii, and we are keeping our kids in the classroom, and they need to be outside learning. It's just my motto.
Except the last month when we had, you know, 2 inches of rain in an hour and 50-mile-an-hour winds and everything's flooded.
Well, of course, you know, if it's inclement
But other
weather,
than that,
they shouldn't be outside. But, you know,
yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I have to add that in because the weather has
put up a
been
big tent.
Yeah.
the weather has been just bewildering the last month. It's just amazing.
It is true.
So I want to share a comment that came in from Rob, and this is for Jay. He says, our farm and others have grown Jay's. The name of it is the Nalo Orange Flint corn, and processed it into cornmeal and grits. So that's a appreciation for the corn. And you know what, when we set out to make today's show, we talked about, you know, the title we gave it is How Do We Make Hawaii's Agriculture Thrive? So we know seed is foundational. But I would like to just pivot a little bit to ask each one of you, if there was one thing that you, I mean, so obviously so many things can and should be done, but if you had the ability to change one thing that you felt would be the thing that could most improve where we are with agriculture at the moment, I'm curious what each one of you, what that would be for each one of you. And maybe you can each share that, and then we can use what you've chosen to kind of further our discussions. So I could either, okay, Glenn, I was gonna ask for volunteers.
I was just thinking about this morning. Okay, if you wanted to impact right off the bat, you would develop special agricultural parks for beginning farmers, exclusively for beginning farmers. And the prerequisite would be they just completed beginning farmer training. That would be the prerequisite. You have all these, 350 graduates of the Go Farm program. A lot of them are still struggling to get a piece of land. So if the state set aside land, said, okay, you need to have a certain prerequisite, you need to have some knowledge about farming, you need to understand the business, and you will have access to this land, the impact would be phenomenal.
I mean, it's interesting that Glenn says that. That's actually what I've also been thinking is some kind of, you know, ag parks, you know, and the most ideal would be where people could live. So we've got people that, you know, they go through our program, then they're in our incubator farm, but then they really need some place that they can then go and farm and ideally live. And they're used to being in an environment where they're sharing some of the, the most costly equipment, tractors, the wash station, the walk-in cooler. So if the state or KS or Ulupono or whoever it is could create this network around the state, and then, depending on what island you are on, there's like on Oahu, there's FarmLink Kauai, there's already these aggregators that could help with, okay, you've got these, 5-10 farms, they're gonna all aggregate their stuff at that place, and then you've got these people that could help market it. And I think it brings up also the issue that you alluded to early on about scale and size. And I feel like we hear a lot of positive things about our program. I feel like sometimes people say, oh, that's cute, you guys are just doing these like little gardens, we need like big farmers, that's how we're going to address the our food issue here. But some of our most successful farmers right now in our incubator program, they're basically farming a half of an acre. They said that based on their present sales, they would be able to gross like $130,000 a year. They could net like $100,000 a year. That's on half an acre. So like it's viable. I mean, they're getting some, they're being propped up. So they're like their true costs, the state or, through our grants, they're getting, some of that's being absorbed. But I think if we could have lots and lots and lots and hundreds of those people around the state, it would, make such an impact. And then if there's flooding in Haleiwa and, Twin Bridges farms, not that Twin Bridges just got washed out, but one farm gets washed out, we don't lose like all the state's tomato production. Just by having more farmers, you inherently are going to have a more resilient system. And I think, it's true that you lose some efficiencies of scale, but I think with the internet, and different software programs now, we can use technology to really kind of smooth some of that out and make efficiencies built into these decentralized systems.
Right. Yeah.
Nancy, I'm going to hear your idea, and then, and it may tie into this, but then I'd like to come back to this idea of these parks, these areas, and talk about them a little more. But Nancy, what would the one thing be that you would do if you?
Well, I just want to say to something that Jay was just talking about, and that is that it's pretty much been proven that one 1,300 acre farm or 1,300 1 acre farms are really different. And the 1,300 1 acre farms can produce an amazing amount of food and really contribute to an agricultural economy, much more so than one 1,300 acre farm that has a lot of waste. But that's a whole nother story. But if I could do one thing, it would be a garden in every school, a school garden teacher that's trained in every garden, professional development for the teachers so that they can work with the garden teacher and integrate fully integrated curriculum into the garden. And this is not to make farmers. This is so that our young people can understand where their food comes from and know how to eat healthily. We, our state does a physical examination for all of the kindergarteners that come in. And so that's kind of the only underlying data that we have about how our kids are doing. And I don't think it's changed, but about 5 years ago, the kindergarteners coming in were about 1/3, 33% overweight or obese. And so if you are 5 years old and 1/3 of the students are already suffering from this is what leads to chronic disease early on in life. And so really to have a school garden is to have a vibrant nutritional education program so that not only know how to grow the food, but you take it into your school garden kitchen and you prepare snacks and you learn what healthy food is. And then you can go home and you can work with your parents and you can say, hey, mom, dad, let's start a garden at home. Let's start cooking some fresh foods. So really, a garden in every school, a school garden teacher in every garden, and a fully integrated curriculum. If we had that, all the rest of it would come in time.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And if anybody hasn't seen it, I want to just point them to the essay that Greg Christian wrote this week for Civil Beat about looking at, it's called The State Government Should Be Doing Its Part by Buying Local, but it's essentially looking at exactly those issue of nutrition, of food, of locally grown food, and of having that go into the schools, and that whole connection between education and health and gardens and awareness of food. Going back to this idea of having some sort of ag parks, and I'd love to get more specific about what they would look like so that we can really kind of try and solidify this dream. So, you know, Jay, you were talking about that people could live there, that there would be, for large, more expensive equipment, that would be there, that people could share that. I'm curious, Glenn or Jay, or like what you would see as the optimal size of the acreage, of the length of the lease, and of the numbers of farmers, let's say, in an ag park. Let's, you know, how would this, do you think, best work to really have it produce the best food, and work as well as it can for the farmers?
I'll try. I think 5 acres would work. 100 farms, so that's 500 acres. Critical infrastructure, shared infrastructure, such as a processing kitchen, post-harvest handling, equipment sharing, possibly even like a mini co-op that you hire one person to do all the tractor work, so that person also maintains all the equipment. You can't have a whole lot of people running the equipment and not maintaining. So you need an individual. You would schedule who, what area is going to be cleared at a certain time. You probably have to agree on whether you're going to use pesticides or no pesticides. You could probably even do an organic agricultural park, which is trending, definitely trending. So I think you can kind of couch this in that way. And the other part is that the farmers need to work together. They need to understand, you want to be able to create a certain amount of interdependence. The other thing is you need to have a certain amount of time where these individuals can invest in the farm. You cannot have a month-to-month or year-to-year lease. You're going to be stuck growing fast crops, and you're probably not going to be taking care of the soil in that process. So if you had, say, a 25, 30-year lease, this would allow these individuals to invest, to get loans, and be able to have the small equipment that they need at their farm and to do their food safety and whatever else they needed on their individual farm. But you have shared facilities, so not everybody has to buy a tractor at $40,000 or $50,000 a crack. You have a shared facility for processing and value added, and even the possibility of marketing together to fill this critical mass of large scale agriculture. So I think, you know, people would say, oh, that's utopian and it's all this, but that is what we need. And one of the things that Jay hit right on the head is you gotta decentralize agriculture. Okay, you got lettuce, you got Salinas with all the lettuce, you got Yuma with all the lettuce, you get a big freeze and there goes all the lettuce. And the same thing in Hawaii. Okay, you got a big rain in the Central Plains and Larry Just Tomatoes gets wiped out, or a loon's farm gets hit. So you have to move the food to the different islands. The cost of freight is killing us right now. You need to have food right in your neighborhood. And that is the key to the whole thing.
Okay.
Relocalize the food system.
Yes.
We just keep hearing that more and more and more. You know, Jay, I had question I was going to ask you, but you look like maybe you wanted to say something first.
Oh, I was just gonna, follow up on the idea of the, how the ag parks could look. And I think people being able to live there is like, the dream and the ideal. And I mean, even a model where people could like buy in and then they get bought out at some point, so you're like getting some equity out of it, would be like the most utopian. But regardless of that happening or not, I think like Glenn is saying, like long term leases. I think 5 acres is great, but I think even the option for people to have smaller acreages would be great too. I mean, we have a lot of people come out of our program, like the people I was just mentioning, who are are at a half an acre doing market gardening. Like they could be set with an acre or 2 acres and producing lots of food, doing it really efficiently. So I think creating some space for folks like that would be really great.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. The question I was going to ask you was about housing, because I know that's a big issue. And it makes a lot of sense that farmers would be able to live there, both because the cost of living is so high, also because people want to live near their crops, also because of agricultural theft. There's so many reasons.
Yeah.
I guess I wanted to ask you, I imagine you have thought about what would this housing be like? And the reason that I ask that is because, if it becomes too cumbersome, then it's almost like rather than an ag park, it becomes a housing development. Then it turns into something else. It becomes a lot more expensive. It takes a lot more time and things get bogged down. So how do you, in a practical way, enable farmers to live there without it sort of shooting itself in the foot and getting stopped?
Well, we have, I feel like there's some really great examples of folks that we know around Oahu have built tiny homes, converted, containers into homes, or, 2 containers and then some trussing over it to create like a little area between. And so it's something that can totally be removed from the property. And I know that is a big issue. And I know that all the landowners are nervous about people living on ag land, because it has been an issue of people, abusing it. And I think another thing that's important, if, we were to envision this model, is basically like in our incubator program. So people go through training and then they're able to spend 3 years in our incubator. They're still meeting with our team. They have like revenue goals. We're going around looking at their plots, basically scoring them on their soil management, their weed management, their pest management. Like there has to be a very concrete way to kick people out that are abusing the system, because I think that's, I think everyone would probably agree that that's kind of rife around the state, where there are these agricultural areas that have been set up that in theory are supposed to do what we're talking about. But we've got nurseries in there, which, those do create jobs. That is horticultural, but it's not producing food. There's landscaping companies, there's trucking companies, there's all these people kind of like figuring out ways to get on ag land. And then once they're there, it's like more work for the entities managing the land to kick them out than it's almost worth. So I feel like if there's really concrete ways where you've got to be producing food, you've got to be hitting these earning goals, you've got to be, managing your area in this agreed upon way. And if you don't, like, sorry, but like, you've got to go, it could work. And that's not like an easy thing. Like somebody's got to be the manager of that. And Glenn talked about cooperatives, and I think there's probably some examples of cooperatives working, but, often they fall apart too, just because of interpersonal dynamics, or nobody's really in charge. So the management of this, I think, is really important. And I think probably a reason that it's not happening is, I mean, I know GoFarm's like, we don't want to do it. DOA's like, not us. KS is like, not us. Everyone's like, not us. Someone should. We'll give money, we'll give advice, but we don't want to be the managers. We don't want to be the police. And if you think about it from a landowner's perspective, you'd rather lease to one person 1,000 acres than 500 people 20 acres, or whatever, you don't want to deal with tons of people. You want to deal with one person. So there's got to be these, positions somehow funded and people with the right skill set to manage these things so that they function and don't turn into, like you're saying, just a housing development in the end.
So here's a question from Tamara, and she's asking, how can people who are interested in an ag park get involved and get on a list? And it seems like that, maybe Tamara, I'm not sure that we necessarily have an answer to that. If the issue is, as you're saying, Jay, everybody can see that it's a good idea and no one yet has really stepped forward to undertake it. I would like to ask maybe Glenn, whoever is best to speak to this, who sees a solution to that problem?
I think you need to have a working group to come up with the pieces to the puzzle and aim for the next legislature and have the mechanics all worked out. I agree with everything Jay is talking about. There's been abuse in the past and there's a lot of moving parts, so nobody wants to touch it. But there's a great opportunity. I mean, what Jay was saying, there's even needs for 1 acre lots. So if you look at the cost of a 1 acre lot in developing an ag park, it's minimal. But if you're making, 500 acre parcels, that's a tough one. And if you look at what's happening in the ag parks and even in some of the things with the ADC, the ones who are getting the lots are the ones that are already farming. You're not really building up more farmers. You need that numbers. It's a numbers game. You need to have more farmers. You need to have young farmers. They need to be starting at a younger age. You cannot be starting farming when you're 65 years old. So, and a lot of them will get to that point. I mean, Hawaiian Homes is dealing with that issue right now when people are trying to get on Hawaiian Home lands and the average age of those on the waiting list is 66 years old. And I want to farm and I hope I can get to farm before I get old. So you need to get them at a young age. And so the Go Farm program is very diverse. You have a lot of different ages in there, but diversity is our strength. In Hawaii, diversity is our strength. Whether it's ethnic, size of the farms, everything, that's our strength in Hawaii. And we got to capitalize on that. So you need a working group that understands all the mechanics of something like this. You need to overcome this living on the farm problem that everybody's kind of against. There's ways of doing it, and it has to do with enforcement. You need to meet certain criteria. You need to be actively farming. And if you're not, you're going to have to get off. And there's another guy in line that wants to farm. So there's ways of doing it. It's not an impossible dream, but you need the parties on the table. You need the right parties on the table to work all the mechanics out and then propose it to the Department of Agriculture or the state legislature.
Yeah. It just seems like, there's a lot of land. There are a lot of people. There's a lot of talent. There's a lot of need. The parts all fit together.
I just want to point out, I can't remember, I think there was definitely a podcast, and I think there was an article that you all ran recently, Civil Beat ran about, about this issue of people being able to get land. And we deal with it all the time because we have people come, through the program, they sign up to hear about when pieces of DOA land come up, and like they'll send the emails and that's just kind of like a black hole, like they never hear anything, and they'll sign up to like see if they can get something from ADSC, and then they just kind of like it's a black hole. Like there's all these kind of paths that are supposed to be how people get land, and they're just like real opaque, and it's like some of it's just you got to know somebody, or someone has a lease, they want to pass it on to someone that they know. But I think, if there were more places, and like Glenn is talking about, more set processes of how things are supposed to happen, that would definitely improve things. But I just wanted to point out that you guys had written a really great article kind of, addressing some of these issues and actually hearing from some folks dealing with trying to find land and having trouble.
Yeah. Okay. And we will put, I'll just say that we'll put the link to that. That was Claire's story on the agricultural parks, and we will put the link to that here with this post so that people can find that article and read it. And I just want to, I know that when we were all speaking, the four of us, and we said, well, we're going to talk for about an hour, but we know we could talk for much longer. We're now over an hour. So I think we've got a couple more questions that we can get to, and I don't feel like we have a hard time that we need to finish. But we've been talking for a while, and I'm so appreciative because I feel like so many good ideas have come forth already. Okay, Glenn, I feel like you have another one.
Well, I think, there needs to be incentives to move into ag parks. And I think the state really had a lost opportunity when they didn't buy Castle and Cook land down in Waialua. Then you had an agriculture community. Right now, there's a lot of speculation going on around there. You have gentlemen's estates, fake farms coming out in Wahiawa and everything. And once that happens, it kind of screws up the whole works. Most of the landowners are looking at ag zoning as a holding pattern for future development. There's a lot of uncertainty, so they don't know what to do, so they don't want to commit. So there was a study done when the Waihole water case was going on. And what came out of that study was that these guys the landowners don't want a lot of small farmers on the land because they're organized and they can't kick them out. And this happened a lot of times in Kalama Valley is an example. They couldn't get the farmers out of Kalama Valley. That was Kamehameha schools, so they could develop. So you have this fear out there, but at the same time, the landowners have to be realistic about what's going on. If you're going to call your land agriculture, then you better use it for agriculture and not use it as a tax break. And the state needs to tighten up on those kind of things. I mean, if you're going to dedicate your land to agriculture, put a timeline on it, 25 years, 30 years, then you can use it for agriculture now. I mean, I'm kind of amazed at how long the Central Plains has stayed in agriculture. The Waihole case was in the 90s, so it's like 25 years that this land has been in agriculture. But now you had Ho'opili came in, and they're starting to push the farmers out of the Central Plains. I'm surprised it lasted this long. I expected the development to come in much sooner. But now these farmers are going to have to move out. And you have farms right under the rail. You have a green onion farm. I have a picture of a green onion farm right under the rail in there. So all these farmers are going to move out. You have all these people that eat food on Oahu. I mean, 1 million people. Where are they going to get it? Our whole infrastructure is so vulnerable. You have a tsunami. You have all the airports on the shore, with the exception of Molokai and Lanai. You have all the ports. And then you have all the petroleum facilities and electrical facilities on the shore. We're so vulnerable. People, they don't see it. And you have a big wave, and then you can't get anywhere. You can't get to Hawaii Kai. You can't get to the Leeward Coast. We are so vulnerable, and nobody seems to care. And so we have to, food is, we should have a new department. It should be called like the State Department of Survival and Food Security, because I have to ask, what is the role of the Department of Business, Economic Development, Tourism in agriculture? What is their role? If you're economic development and you're not looking at food, then something is really wrong.
That is a great suggestion. Nancy, I can hear you want to jump in here.
Well, and Glenn, you'll want to say something about this, and Jay too probably, is that, if we really want Hawaii's agriculture to thrive, we're actually going to have to invest more in it as a state. If we look at the amount of money that goes into the Hawaii Department of Agriculture per year, it is the least funded state agency of all of them. It's less than 1%, somewhere around 0.5% of our entire state budget. So if we want something to grow and to thrive, we actually need to invest in it, just like we have invested in tourism, because we wanted tourism to be part of our economy. We have the potential here in Hawaii to have agriculture be much, and a very diverse agriculture to be much greater part of our economy, but we are actually going to have to invest in it. And I just want to give a shout out to Hawaii Department of Agriculture, because they are doing an amazing job with the little funding that they get. And they have been providing a lot of opportunities right now. They have a micro grant program right now that you can find the details on the Hawaii Department of Agriculture website. And this is geared to the home grower. And in the 45 years that I've lived in Hawaii, I don't really remember ever a time that a grant was being given by a state agency for home growers and also for animal raising and fishermen and this kind of thing. So, you know, the specialty crop block grant has been very instrumental in helping fund new agricultural businesses in the state, like the Hawaii Seed Growers Network and many more. And this is because our Department of Agriculture has reached out and worked with the federal government to bring monies in. So they're doing, you know, it seems like they're doing their part, what they can, but the legislature funds them. And it's really up to the legislature to increase funding to HDOA so that HDOA can become the authority for invasive species. We haven't talked about this, but invasive species are impacting our agriculture as much or more than climate change, and they kind of go hand in hand.
Yep.
I mean, the amount of new invasive species that comes and threatens our crops every year is just growing, right, Glenn, Jay?
Yes, yes. I can add to that. I mean, recently we had a new insect attacking mamake. We also had a new one attacking avocados. You got 2 of them on coffee. And at one time we had 10 new major insects in Hawaii. Right now it's up to 20 new major insects a year. So in about, I want to say 10, 12 days, a new insect every 10 to 12 days. That is ridiculous. And so who's gonna monitor it? Is somebody gonna inspect every one of those? I don't know how many containers come in a week. I heard a number like 1,000 containers inspecting. And one of the problems is all the food we're bringing in. Okay, so we bring in 90% of our food, and some of those food have insects on them. So if we grew more of our food, we would be bringing less insects in on our vegetables.
And some countries have the shipper pay, you know, so if you want to ship to Hawaii, then you're going to pay a small fee to have that food inspected. And we don't do that. So there's plenty of solutions here.
Yeah, it's so complex. And going back to your point, Glenn, about, well, really all of your points, but about the ways in which land for agriculture is valued and not valued. And this particularly on Oahu, but really all across the islands, this idea of land essentially being called ag land and it's lip service. And rather than people really getting excited about it, really wanting to use it, really thinking about, you know, the food that can be created, the vitality, the vibrancy, all, like you were saying at the beginning of our conversation, all the different soils, all the different climatic conditions, the fact that you can grow so many different things. And, you know, instead it's just like, well, we're just biding our time until we can build housing on it. So that's a mindset. And so I feel like, you know, we should have another conversation at some point, because there's so many good ideas here, and it's such an important time and a changing time. I had one more question that I was going to ask all of you. It's a pretty simple one. And then if you have any closing thoughts, and then maybe we'll move towards closing. But in the same way that I was asking about sort of one thing that you would like to see, I'd like to ask each of you, if there was one crop that you really feel Hawaii should be growing more of, a food crop that Hawaii should be growing more of, what would that be?
Taro. I mean, last week they couldn't get the taro out of Honolulu. The road down to Honolulu got covered with landslide. They couldn't bring the taro out. Honolulu Poi was calling all the stores and say, sorry, we don't have any poi this week. Okay, so again, this decentralization of food. So Honolulu has like 75% of all the poi. We should be growing we should have other areas of the state where we can grow poi as backup. And again, decentralizing taro and every other crop. So for me, I think taro is, I grow a lot of taro, and so I have a kind of closeness to that crop.
Okay. Jay, what about you? What do you think we should be growing more of?
That's a hard one for me. I mean, I was going to say taro for the same reasons that Glenn was saying. I was also thinking about rice, and I saw that we had some viewers talking about, hey, you guys aren't talking about rice, and there's so much rice consumed here. There used to be a lot of rice produced. So that would be another one. And then like Glenn saying, he's fond of and grows lots of kalo. So I'm fond of and grow lots of corn. So I'd love to see more, we have some sweet corn, but more, corn for grits, polenta, tortillas, that kind of, more staple corn. So, really what I think we need, what I'd love to see more are staple crops. I think we're doing a pretty good job on vegetables, decent on fruits, but really very few staples other than kalo, and we need much more of that also.
Okay. What do you think, Nancy?
I think the three sisters, I go with corn, beans, and squash. Those three have formed the food system foundation for so many countries of the world, and they are tropical. They are all tropical crops that do really, really well here, and they could also help form the foundation of our food system in everybody's backyard.
In everybody's backyard. So, and speaking of corn, one of the things that we wanted to do, Jay, you mentioned Dr. Jim Brubaker, and Dr. Jim Brubaker was a plant breeder. All three of you knew him. He was a plant breeder at the University of Hawaii for 57 years. He was a legend all through the tropical world for the corn that he bred, and made a major impact on 20th century agriculture, tropical agriculture. And he passed last week. And so just before we came on today, we talked about how we wanted to dedicate today's show to Dr. Brubaker for the incredible work that he did, and coming back to this foundational idea of seed and the tremendous wisdom that is contained within seed when we select for it. So I want to thank all of you, and I want to ask each one of you if you have any last thought that you would want to share with the viewers about where we are right now with ag, and what you would like to leave us with. You want to start, Glenn?
Okay. That's a loaded question. It comes down to people power. Okay, so if the people feel that this is important, they need to make their thoughts be known. And so we need to come together to identify what is needed in Hawaii agriculture and get to the legislature and impose our will on them. I mean, that is the way things are done. Everything else is not, we don't have a lot of money, so we're not going to lobby them. It's going to be people power saying the same thing over and over again. And that's where we're going to have change. I think, sometimes I used to say the only change that comes is revolutionary, but, maybe we can go a little bit less than revolutionary, but it may create a revolutionary movement.
Mm-hmm. Evolutionary, maybe.
Yes.
Jay.
I guess I've, been thinking a lot about the saying, strike the hammer while the iron's hot. I just feel like we're in a really interesting moment where, like, COVID has slapped people awake. We had a run on our seeds. All the seed companies around the country, are having issues fulfilling orders. FarmLink, had thousands of people signing up. All of our farmers had, people banging down their doors wanting to get food. It shook people, and they realized what Glenn was saying is that we are super, super vulnerable. And I think before we get lulled back to this sense of false comfort, continuing to make some concrete steps, towards really changing our food system. And I just wanted to mention that UH West Oahu has a really exciting program called the Sustainable Community Food Systems Program that's really trying to deal with a lot of the interdisciplinary issues that we're talking about here of really, yes, we need to change agriculture, but really it's our whole food system. And so It's exciting that they're doing that work, and for people interested, not necessarily in farming, but in like the whole kind of context of how our entire economy and diets and political system is, shaping our agriculture. That's a good resource to check out and be aware of.
Okay, that's great. We'll put a link to that
Right.
as well. Nancy.
I'd like to just leave with some words from Jim Brubaker himself. I found a personal profile of his on the internet a few days ago, and he said that his career focus was crop improvement for rural poor people in the tropics. That was his whole focus of his work, and that some of his greatest challenge was to convince the University of Hawaii to keep ag applied research and biotech in balance. And his greatest future challenge was the seed industry must address more creatively the challenges of tropical agriculture. Most of the world's hungry people live in the tropics. So thank you, Dr. Brubaker, for all of your work. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. And thanks for closing on that note too, of just, we're all human, and to keep going, we all need that food to nourish us. So I really want to thank all three of you for being here. This was a great conversation. I feel like so many ideas came forth. So we should do it again soon. And in the meantime, thank you all for the essay that you wrote for us earlier this month that kicked all of this off. So to the viewers, we'll be back on April 7th at 2 p.m. We'll be looking at housing at that point. So thank you so much for being with us today. Thanks to all, and aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you.